Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we're going to keep going with our Learn to Play series for the Japanese heavy cruisers by taking a look at Tier 9's Ibuki. Ibuki has the unfortunate misfortune, boy, that was a bad turn of phrase, the unfortunate misfortune of being the Tier 9 ship in this line. Now, that's not inherently a bad thing. The ship is quite capable. But of course, Tier 9 in the modern game of World of Warships is a really uncomfortable place to be. There was a time in the game's past where Tier 9 meant, well, you're almost to the end, and you know, you're only getting +1 matchmaking, and yeah, maybe the Tier 9 ship is capable. You might want to free XP through it. There are a handful of Tier 9s in the game that I would say are genuinely bad enough that I would just skip them with free XP. But blessedly, Ibuki is not that ship. The problem is, she's still Tier 9, and in the modern era of warships, that means she can still occasionally be bottom tier. Why? Because wargaming has cursed us with superships. So, Ibuki, as good as capable a ship as she is, will still occasionally feel really bad to play because she's up against things like Annapolis, which is a ship that just grossly outclasses you, even though you are an excellent heavy cruiser. Matchmaking aside, though, if you kind of take that and put it in its own box and realize that, well, that's just something you're going to have to deal with, the ship itself is quite good. It is an excellent culmination of all of the other lessons you've learned to get to this point in the line. And the good news is that finally, for the first time, you get a heal. And that means that some of those, sometimes when you play when you play Miyoko or Mogami or one of the earlier ships, you make that turn early and a battleship or a heavy cruiser slaps you for a bunch of HP, and then you're kind of playing on the back foot the rest of the game because you can't recover that health. Ibuki, blessedly, gives you a bit of an out in those situations. Now, of course, the heal itself is not going to repair catastrophic damage if you get dev struck off the board via Vermont in the first 3 minutes of the game. So don't be stupid, right? But it does mean that Ibuki can take the occasional risk that her predecessors cannot take, and then she can potentially survive it. Potentially survived it, not always. So let's have a look at her on the ship. I think you're going to like what you see. I certainly enjoy this ship quite a bit. She is an excellent successor to Mogami. Let's get started. Survivability, 43,050 hit points. That is with Survivability Expert on the captain. Her base health here, when you compare her to contemporaries, is 39,000 flat. That's terrible. That's terrible. And the main reason that it's terrible is because for the second straight tier, we've gone down in health, right? We've gone down in health again. Mogami had 39,100 hit points, and once again, I have less. Now, it's only 100 hit points less, but still, wargaming, what the hell, right? It's been 8 years of this ship, and you can't take the time to maybe try to balance her or buffer a little bit? Like, what's going on? It is frustrating to play a ship this capable with a health pool this small. I think in some ways, if I was to speculate, it is a bit of a balancing feature of the ship. What do I mean by that? All right, Ibuki is not a ship, again, like her predecessors, that has a lot of utilities. She can't inherently detect destroyers at long range, right? She has no access to radar and those sorts of things. But pound for pound, this ship and her successor, Zhao, at Tier 10, arguably have more firepower than any other Tier 10 or Tier 9, in this case, traditional heavy cruiser in the game. Right? You have these ridiculously amazing Japanese guns that aren't going to win any DPM races, but they certainly are going to hit like trains. They have the AP is very good. The HE is amazing. It'll light fires. You're going to rack up fire damage for days in this ship, right? And then on top of that, you're married to the Japanese 610 millimeter torpedoes that, again, hit like trains, and you've got 4 quads on this ship. So I think in the end, as much as I hate it, as much as it aggravates the bejesus out of me, her health pool being as low as it is a way to help try and balance the ship. Now, that doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it. I personally think there's a world, especially now that the game has, matured quite a bit, that I think certainly Mogami, Ibuki, and then we'll talk about it with Zhao. I think those 3 ships need a bit of a balance pass when you compare them to where we are in the state of the modern game. But with that said, you just kind of have to learn to live with it, right? That's where Ibuki is today, and so you better get used to it. This is worst in tier. 39,000 health is worst in tier. Next worst would probably be San Luis, just a touch under 41,000. After that, just about everybody else comes in the mid 40s. Buffalo 47,000, Brindisi 45,000, Drake 47,000, Rune nearly 50,000, Riga over 50,000, etc., etc. So you are at least 5 to 10,000 hit points behind the other ships that are competing for this tier 9 cruiser slot in matchmaking. And so that means you're going to have to carry your weight, right? That goes back to what I was saying. Don't get dev struck. If you don't get dev struck, you have the tools to pull your weight in a match, right? As long as you've got something to shoot at, you're going to be in good shape. 16% torpedo protection is not best in tier. It's not worst in tier because LOL, the Americans exist. If you remember going through the American line, they never get really better than 4%. So 60% is here. But again, as we've been saying all along, with a heavy cruiser, with any cruiser, you don't want to take torpedoes, right? It's a terrible, terrible idea. You're just not built for it. You do have a heal. You can recover some of that damage if it does happen now. So you're starting at this here. But go out of your way to not do this, right? Anytime you're playing this ship, prioritize protecting your health pool above getting damage. Because if you're dead, you can't do damage. And getting damage is kind of the name of the game in this ship, right? So definitely keep an eye out for that. Armor scheme. 25 millimeter bow. We saw this on Mogami. Still got it here. No change. 25 millimeter there, and then 32 millimeters through the deck. So again, in fights, just like with Mogami, fights with other heavy cruisers, you're going to struggle because you're going to take full pins as soon as they throw HE at you, right? It's a factor of Ibuki, right? You're going to have to use other things that we'll talk about in a minute to help balance the ship in that regard, help manage your health pool, let's say. Have a quick look at the Citadel. We've got a 140 armor belt up near the magazines on both ends. But if you'll see through the middle of the ship, you have only 100 mils, just under 4 inches of armor. And again, she tries to do this goofy turtleback sort of thing, but it's so high. It's so high out of the water. I just don't know that there's a ton of value in this. Maybe there's value in this angled plate here. I don't know. I'll put the torpedo protection up real briefly. Is there a bit of a French-style spaced armor scheme going on? And the answer is no. No, not really. The torpedo bulge might occasionally trap the occasional shell. You can't really see it that well. There is a small gap in here between the Citadel wall and the torpedo bulge. So I guess technically you've got this extra 27 mils of plating hanging off the side of the ship. But no, again, you're still a fairly lightly armored heavy cruiser. You're not going to stand up to battleships. You're going to want to angle. You're going to want to angle when you're engaging other heavy cruisers and probably even light cruisers just to be on the safe side. Depending on the light cruiser in question, they can penetrate your belt armor and the range, right? Certain light cruisers can do that because they have some of them certainly by the time you get into these tiers, they have really, really high velocity guns. So yeah, same kind of handicaps you've been playing with in terms of armor and health pool. So all of that should be familiar, even if it does at this point start to feel a little bit unfair. So let's go have a look at something that the ship does really well, and that is maneuverability and concealment. 35 knots of base speed is not quite best in tier, but it's damn close, right? Like you're still behind the Italians, and you're just a hair behind Dmitry Donskoy over in the Russian cruiser tree. Beyond that, you're faster than basically everybody else that I would consider a heavy cruiser in this tier. You have plenty of speed. You've basically 37 knots here with the CRF mic flag installed. You'd have 35 and change without it. 770 on the turning circle, 7.3 on the rudder shift bow. So the rudder shift time is best in tier. Like, it's just not going to get much better than that. The turning circle is, I'd say, statistically about average. There are a couple ships that are a little better than this, a couple of ships that are worse than this. You're kind of right smack in the middle. Where Ibuki really shines, right, as we've been discussing, the big asset of the Japanese heavies is that stealth, right? You look down at concealment, a full stealth rig Ibuki, 9.9 on the surface. For tech tree heavy cruisers at tier 9, that is best in tier. Nobody else can touch you in this department. The only traditional heavy cruiser that comes close to this is American Premium USS Tulsa, which actually beats you out a little bit. But Tulsa has a different set of handicaps that we talk about in a different video. So as far as your contemporaries, the ships that you would compare this one to out of the tech tree, you're looking at Rune, San Luis, Brindisi, Drake, Buffalo, Donskoy, and Riga. You outspot all of those guys. One of the lessons that I hope you have learned along the way, and you really definitely need to learn it when you play Mogami, right? In Miyoko, it's a little more challenging because your detection there is about 11.5. By the time you get to tier 8, you've got concealment, and you pick up, Mogami's detection is like, what, 9.5? This feels bad because you're losing a little bit of that detection, but you're gaining a heal. And that's a good thing. But the bottom line is that you've got to learn, certainly at tier 8, but certainly by the time you get to tier 9, if you're going to have a fun at tier 10, you got to learn when to fire and when not to fire. The Japanese heavies really reward patience, almost battleship level patience in terms of when to reveal yourself and when not to. As long as you have other teammates on the board doing spotting for you and you're hanging back 12, 13 kilometers from whatever engagement is going on, the opposing team may not know that you're there. If you haven't been spotted for a while and whatnot, you can work this ship into a position. You can do it with Zhao, you can do it with Mogami, that the enemy team might not be expecting until suddenly, oh Lord, here comes the AP salvo, on a broadside cruiser coming in, and it's 4 seconds away, and you had no idea that ship was even there to shoot at you. Ibuki's capable of that because of this detection. So it's a huge asset of the ship. But man, you got to learn when to use it, and when not to use it, let's say, because there are absolutely times that you want to just pretend, go away. You want to just pretend it's not there and just get your hands dirty, get engaged. And there are times it's like, okay, I need to go dark, use my stealth, go be somewhere else, or take pot shots as the stealth allows while the target I'm shooting at is not looking at me, is looking at somebody else. Huge asset of the ship. Huge asset of the ship. Can't recommend it enough. Absolutely best in tier. All right, so main battery. If you played a 203 Mogami, you are 100% familiar with this main battery. If you played if you played Miyoko and all the ships before, you've seen these are the same guns you've been looking at, right? These are the 203 millimeter, 50 caliber Japanese guns on I believe the base reload is about 13 seconds. My spreadsheet says 13.7 seconds. That sounds about right. Certainly 13 and change. You have 3 turrets up forward and 2 turrets back aft. The aft turrets in a super firing configuration, of course, and the forward turrets in somewhat of a super firing with that B turret here in kind of the awkward, 2 on the same deck level configuration that prevents this one from firing over the bow at, short ranges. At long ranges, you can fire directly over the bow because the guns are already elevated in the zero position, right? If you're firing directly over the bow, and you can get the guns elevated at longer ranges, then yeah, you can fire all 3. But otherwise, to get all 3 turrets, you've got to start shifting, 10, 15 degrees off the bow to get that number 2 turret engaged. Shells are what you're used to at this point. 3300 HE, 4700 AP, 840 on the velocity. Same gun performance you've had up to this point. All of that should be familiar. You do get a little more range, out to 16.5 kilometers here at tier 9. That's nice. That feels good, right? And that's lovely. Now, one of the things that I want to point out about Ibuki that I think I kind of sort of knew this, but didn't really appreciate it until I pulled the numbers and really looked at it, is that of all the ships in the line, Ibuki seems to have some of the best gun firing angles. If I want to get all of her, I'll put the graphs up here so you can see it. If I want to get all 5 of her turrets firing forward off the bow, I only have to show 35 degrees of my ship to do that. That means that if I'm, all things being equal, if I'm firing at, let's say, an opposing heavy cruiser, and I'm only showing him a 35-degree angle, most of his turrets, depending on their location and so on and so forth, I'll probably start generating ricochets, right? If he's firing AP at me. That's wonderful. That's awesome, right? The Americans, of course, if you're firing an American heavy cruiser, you might want to take a little more caution, but just about anybody else's heavy cruiser, he's going to want to be firing HE or something else, SAP, possibly at you. The stern angles are also pretty good here. They're not, I won't say they're best in tier, but I mean, I'm getting, 36 degrees off the stern? That's pretty good. Being able to get basically all 5 turrets engaged at what amounts to like 35 degrees off the bow and more or less 35 degrees off the stern, that's pretty good. Like that is a highly flexible ship that you can push with if you really need to, and is more than capable of kiting if she has to, particularly with, we go back and have a peek, that rudder shift time. 7.3 seconds on the rudder shift means you have really good opportunities to kind of wiggle. Wiggle a little bit, get your front turrets in action, pop them off, wiggle back the other way while you wait for that reload to come in. So I really have to recommend Ibuki's main battery, right? Like it's an incredible asset to this ship. The turret angles are very favorable. If you remember playing Mogami, you had to fight a couple of those turrets to kind of get all of them online. Ibuki, blessedly, you won't have that problem. So that is lovely. It's a really nice thing to see. While we're on the subject of her main battery, we'll have a quick look at the dispersion curves as we've been doing, just to kind of, again, verify that Ibuki falls where we expect her to. Have a quick look at horizontal dispersion, that light blue line at the bottom there. Best in tier is Ibuki. Just above that, the light purple line, that's Riga, starts off really solid and then kind of falls behind everybody the farther out you go. And if you've played Riga, you know exactly what that looks like. And then that kind of line, that orange, like a maroon, kind of brown line, whatever, that's literally every other Tier 9 heavy cruiser that we're comparing her to, which is Rune, Brindisi, San Luis, Donskoy, Buffalo, and Drake. If we have a quick look at vertical dispersion, again, you can see there, Ibuki, best in tier, followed immediately behind by Buffalo, then San Luis, then Drake, then of all things, Riga coming in for a little while before she, again, like we saw with Talin, she kind of spirals out of control, going off into doing her own thing. The kind of purple and maroon lines you see there, that's Donskoy and Rune, and then at the very top, kind of worst in tier for the dispersion, is Brindisi. And you can see that out to about, Ibuki's range is 16.5 kilometers, and Buffalo's is a little less than that. And by the time you get out past about 11 or so, Ibuki and Buffalo, almost indistinguishable. You know, Buffalo has more shells to put in that ellipse too, so that's one of the reasons that I've liked Buffalo. She's always felt very accurate to me, and this curve kind of reinforces why I like that ship. But Ibuki still edges her out, still technically best in tier in this category. And then if we quick look at just dispersion area, total area of the ellipse, of course, the light blue line, as we've been seeing, Ibuki, best in tier, followed by, as we've been noting, Buffalo. Then you've got kind of a tight group there. That's Talin and Drake and I believe San Luis. Yep. And then just about everybody else kind of falling above that. And then, of course, as you get out past 10 kilometers, as things have sort of settled in, somehow Riga just spirals off into her own category. That dispersion ellipse just grows to just crazy proportions out to her max range when compared to everyone else. So yeah, the main battery on the ship is so good. All right, torpedoes. Now, this is where things are maybe not as amazing as we might want. What do I mean? Well, let's have a quick look at the torpedo firing angles, and I think you'll start to see what I'm talking about. I'll get to that in just a sec. Ibuki brings 4 quads to the dance. We've seen this sort of setup before with Mogami. These torpedoes, again, hit a little harder. I have them buffed in there. The base reload, I think, is about 112 seconds or so. I've taken the 2-point skill that buffs that down, so they're just a hair over 100 seconds here. And then out to 10 kilometers, again, the standard torpedo range up to this point for Japanese cruiser torpedoes, 21,000 on the Alpha is a massive hit, and 67 knots, 1.7 on the detection, means that opposing ships that spot these coming in without, just spotting them on their own will have a little less than 10 seconds to react to their arrival. Now, the good news is I put the torpedo angles up here. The forward torpedo angles are a little better than what you've been used to. If you'll recall, going back to Mogami and Miyoko, the forward angles could only fire just a couple of degrees forward of amidships. On here, I can actually go all the way to 15 degrees forward of amidships. You see there, 75 degrees off the bow. Well, what's the drawback? The drawback is the stern angles are kind of crappy. Right? The drawback is that the stern angles only go back to, 39 degrees off the stern. So Ibuki throwing torpedoes as she kites, back in the face of things pushing into her is obviously still doable. It's easier than throwing them forward, but it is a little more challenging than it was on Mogami and Miyoko because the stern angles are not quite as favorable. You'll probably want to occasionally secure from firing the guns, go, stealth up a little bit if possible, fire these torpedoes because you're more than likely going to have to give up a bit of a nasty angle to do it, and then you can get back on the guns. So just got to keep that in mind, that the stern torpedo angles are not as good, and it's something you're going to have to manage as you play through the ship, and you want to use those torpedoes in the manner in which you become accustomed as you grind up the line. It's going to be a bit more of a challenge here. Airstrike, more or less comparable to what we had at Mogami. 2 flights, 2 bombs a pop, out to 7 kilometers. Big hits there, 4,800. I think that's buffed a little bit. with one of the modules I've got. So yeah, either way, these depth charges are pretty solid. And you can see there I've got the 21.6 second reload, which means I've taken not only the module, but the captain skill, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So yeah, the ship more than capable of thumping submarines if she has to. Trick is, you got to be inside 7 kilometers. Now that's kind of crappy. Good news is, her hydro, if you equip it, goes all the way out to 5 kilometers. So you've got a really nice window in there that you can effectively hunt submarines or keep them, shoved down below periscope depth with your hydro running if you have to. Anti-aircraft defense. Well, here's the good news. It's better than Mogami. Here's the bad news. It's still not amazing. For the first time in this line, Ibuki now offers us a mid-range aura on the back of these 6 double-barreled Japanese knockoffs of the 40mm Bofors. Right? She's got a few of these lingering around the ship. You see there 2 up forward, 2 amidships, and 2 back aft. That's her mid-range aura. That's the whole thing. So that's the problem, is that it's not very good. Right? Most ships in this type, and again, I'm looking at you like a buffalo, most of their punch comes out of that mid-range aura, and you're not going to get that out of Ibuki, because that's all the mid-range aura she gets is those 12 barrels right there. So she puts up a little bit of flak, 6 puffs there with the captain skill, so 5 base, and then 110 DPS in the outer band, 125 in the middle, 162 on the short range on the back of those 25mm triples. So again, Ibuki has more AA than her predecessors, but it's still not really anything to get excited about. Will she shoot down some planes? Yeah. Will she really meaningfully make a big difference to the AA defense of the ships around her? I mean, nah, not really. The flak might, right? If you're banded together with a couple other ships and you're all throwing flak, that can make a big difference, but you're not going to get anything out of her continuous DPS, not anything meaningful. Even with defensive fire, you're only going to get 50% on these values. You combine that with the sector focus, which can be up to 75%. So then the numbers start to get a little more meaningful, but you're never gonna win an airplane DPS race with a Buffalo, right? They're way better ships in this in your tier in the tech tree than this. It does lead, however, to an interesting discussion about what consumable you take, and we'll talk about that in a minute and the reasons why I think there's a valid case to be made for both. Speaking of, let's head that direction. So first thing I want to look at, we'll look at modules. Okay, of course, obviously you're going to start with main armaments 1. That's been kind of the standard as we've gone up the line. I'm running Hydro here in slot 2. Even if you run defensive, if you do run defensive fire, I would actually encourage you to take defensive fire modification here in slot 2. I don't know that it's a great configuration of the ship, but if you wanted to play it that way, I think that is a good way to go. Otherwise, I think engine room protection is a great default. I'm running turret traverse here. As we've seen up the line, the aiming systems mod, the Japanese cruisers already have a leg up on dispersion. If you really want to run aiming systems mod, I say go for it. It will absolutely not cost you. You won't be sorry. I just like main battery mod traverse because it negates basically the debuff that I'm taking by running main battery mod 3 and upgrade in slot 6, which we'll talk about in just a sec. As I mentioned earlier, I'm running airstrike mod in slot 4. I think right now, if you're running a heavy cruiser, this should be your go-to, unless the steering handling of the ship is just god-awful bad and you really need the steering modification. I really think airstrike mod is the way to go for most heavy cruisers. You absolutely want to be maximizing your stealth. There's really only one good option here in slot 5. As we get to slot 6, we have to have a larger discussion. Okay, so main battery mod 3 is what I'm running right now. That lowers my main battery reload, as you saw earlier, down to a little under 11.5 seconds at the cost of some turret traverse. I'm counteracting that turret traverse negative by running main battery mod 2 back here in slot 3. So together, those basically wash out the traverse penalty, and I get a 12% buff to my reload speed. However, there are 2 other things in this list that I want to draw your attention to. One is torpedo tubes modification 2. Now, with only 10 kilometers to play with and 9.9 kilometers of stealth, this is not a recommended option for me, just because I think the torpedoes are excellent, but the torpedoes are not the main feature of the ship. The main battery, the gun angles are significantly better than the torpedo angles. You really need to be leaning into the main battery on these ships and not the torpedoes. I'll sing a different song if we start talking about the Japanese light cruisers, but right now, for the Japanese heavies, I really do not recommend torpedo tubes modification 2. However, gunfire control system mod 2 gives you 16% more range. There is a very real case for this modification because I have such terrible main battery range, right? And we've talked about this, right? The Japanese heavies, I have up to this point had about a 15.7 kilometer range. I'm now all the way out to a whopping 16.5 in a tier where most of my contemporaries, most of the competition goes over 17, right? I'm looking at you, Rune and Saint Louis, certainly Donskoy and Riga. Now, there are some ships that are actually hilariously shorter than this, Drake and Buffalo, okay? But the reality is that when battleships want to shoot you and you want to be far away from them, the range mod is going to look appealing. I'll say this. If you run this mod and it works for you, you don't need my advice. You don't take my advice. You do you. If you are coming into this line and you are new to the Japanese heavies, I would strongly encourage you to not take this modification and run the reload. Here's why. Your gun bloom size will increase with this thing, right? Right here, if I have a 16% gunfire range when I open my main battery up, that means my main battery range goes out to 1.6, probably 2, probably a little around 18-ish, 18 and a half kilometers, something along those lines. Actually, let's plug it in and find out. 19.2 kilometers. That sounds much more realistic for a heavy cruiser, doesn't it? Here's the trick. For starters, your shell velocity has not increased. You're still running the same 840 velocity shells that you've been running literally since Tier 5. At those kinds of ranges, these shells start to become very difficult to lead against anything but the biggest targets, the biggest, slowest, dumbest battleships you can find. If that's what your goal is, go for it, right? That's awesome. Some maps that you're going to run into on this ship will not support this kind of range. Like 19 kilometers is too much range for some maps. But I'm also going to discourage you from doing it because of the gun bloom. When you fire those guns, that means everybody in that 19.2 kilometer circle from your hull, you just lit up the world. Everyone can see you. As opposed to this, where that circle only goes out to 16.5 kilometers. And there are times that the ability to control how your detection range is very, very, very important or very noteworthy when you're playing a Japanese heavy cruiser. So I would encourage you to start with main battery mod 3. And if the range becomes, the shorter range becomes too much to deal with, if it's really frustrating you, by all means, feel free to try the additional range. Just be aware that it comes with a different set of risks. Because now when you pull the trigger, more people are going to have visibility on you, more than otherwise would. And that can potentially lead to more incoming salvos when you don't necessarily want them. Okay? The other reason that I would encourage you to take this reload is that if you really need the extra range, over here on your consumables list, you can take spotting aircraft. For the first time in the line, I can now take spotter plane. This is an amazing development, right? Because there are absolutely times you want the range. But with the spotting aircraft, I get to control when my gun bloom is big like that and when it's not. I can choose to put this plane up knowing that I'm taking the risk of, okay, for these next, 100 seconds while I fire, my gun bloom is larger, and then after that, it'll shrink back to normal and life will go on. When I take the main battery mod range over here, every time I pull the trigger, that's my detection radius. And that can sometimes be a little too much depending on the situation you find yourself in. What I'm getting at is that this compromises your stealth bubble every time you fire to a massive number, right? You go from a 9.9 detection to a 19.2 detection. Over here, when I take the spotter plane, I can then choose, if I wish, to just not use it. If I want the range, if I'm comfortable taking that gun bloom, if the only target I've got to fire on, or there's a really valuable target that's just outside my range, hey, I got my spotter plane, I put it up, I go out, I secure the kill, or I land some fires, or whatever I need, and then eventually the spotter plane goes away, and I'm back to my base detection, which feels really, really nice. Stealth is amazing. Stealth is your ally in these ships, okay? I will also point out, if you do run spotting aircraft, you have the option to run spotter mod in slot 1. This is not a bad way to play the ship. However, if you remember, up until now, we've always run main armaments mod 1. Why? Because if you go back and look at the armor scheme, you still have terrible Glacis armor on the turrets. You will continue, the entire line, you will continue to take turret end caps at the most irritating, inconvenient, and inopportune times. So just don't fall into that trap, in my opinion. Like, I think it's too big a risk. Personal opinion, right? I just don't like it. I vastly prefer having main armaments modification 1. So now that you can run spotter plane in your second consumable slot, I absolutely recommend it. Just get away from fighters. They're not useful most of the time. Take the spotter. You'll be much happier with it. And then, of course, you've got repair party now. Oh, hallelujah, the light is on. Now, slot number 2. I have been recommending hydroacoustic search. I'm going to continue to recommend hydroacoustic search. However, I'm going to caveat that with this. For the first time in the line, you have a ship with at least an average, and not a below average, anti-aircraft suite. Very few things will ruin a Japanese heavy cruiser's game faster than getting spotted at the wrong time by aircraft. If that is a concern or a problem or a worry, or if you're dibbed with a carrier or you play on the Asia server where carriers are very, very popular, that kind of thing, do not be afraid to take defensive fire, okay? You're not going to ever shoot down as many planes as like you will in a Buffalo, okay? But this is for the first time in the line, in my opinion, this is a perfectly valid option for you to push your little planes be gone button to make them go away so you can slip back into stealth, which is where you really want to be most of the time while you're positioning the ship. Okay. But if that's not a concern to you, or you're, whatever, hydro is still the way to go. This is a much more effective tool. You avoid torpedoes. You can hunt submarines. You can hunt destroyers on occasion if they screw up and push too close to you. That kind of things. I still think hydro is the better way to play. Flag setup is going to be more or less the same. You're going to be I'm running Juliet Charlie. I love these flags. You're going to want to buff your fire chances on your main battery with India Victory Lima and Indian X-Ray. I'm running November Echo Seta 7 at this point because, again, I have some money, but if you don't have many of these, I would not waste one of these on this ship. I think Sierra Bravo is an excellent pickup. Buff that hydro or buff that defensive fire, whatever goes in slot 2 right here, gets a buff. For the first time, you want to run India Delta. You want you to get the maximum amount out of your heal. I'm running November Foxtrot and Sierra Mike like I like to, just because I want every little scrap, every little buff, every little advantage I can get when I get into a fight. Commander skills are going to look very similar to what you've run up until this point. I'm talking about Grease the Gears, Gun Feeder, Focus Fire Training, Adrenaline Rush, Survivability Expert, and Concealment Expert. I'm not running Superintendent because I want the extra heal. This is debatable. Cruisers sometimes don't survive long enough to get access to that extra heal. I like to believe that I'm going to get to use it, so I take Superintendent. If you don't have these 3 points, if you don't think you're going to survive, you can spend these points somewhere else that's more valuable to you. Okay? You can make it. I'm not running Demolition Expert, but again, this is never a bad thing. Okay, I am running Fill the Tubes for the 10% torpedo reload buff. I like this skill. I think it's kind of a toss up between these two. If you didn't want to run Superintendent, I would encourage you to take both, honestly. And you might even want to consider Swift Fish. That 5% torpedo speed equates to about 3 or 4 knots. That's going to cut the reaction time of your torpedoes down almost another full second as they head in on an opposing target. I'm running Eye in the Sky. That reduces the consumable cooldown on my spotter plane and gives me the extra charges. The extra charges I will almost never use. I run this because of the consumable cutdown, the duration, the cooldown reduction, and that is so good. If you want to run Priority Target, feel free. This is an excellent skill for this ship. What else could we consider? You could consider the torpedo explosives. Again, I don't think this is a solid way. I like the torpedoes on this ship, but you need to look at them as as we have been up the line. They're solid. Use them, but don't build for them. I think buffing the reload is about as far as I would go. I think anything after that is possibly a bit overkill. You could look into, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the heavy AP. I wouldn't necessarily recommend heavy HE. This is going to compromise your detection, which I don't like. This is good, but you're going to spend most of your time firing the HE. The AP on these ships is a situational case-by-case sort of thing. The case for top grade gunner, in my opinion, falls apart once I get my detection under 10 kilometers. I wouldn't recommend it on like a Baltimore, and I don't recommend it here either. But if you pick the skill, you probably will get some use out of it. I don't like outnumbered. I don't ever want to be in a position where I have to use this skill. That tells me I've kind of messed up my positioning. So that's personal opinion. Radio location and IFHE. Certainly IFHE you don't need on this ship. Radio location, you could take it if you wanted, but again, submarine hunting is not your forte. Don't take this skill. Don't take the 4.A skill on Ibuki. Please don't do this. Please don't do this. Last stand, incoming fire alert. You got some points to throw around. These are not bad skills, but in general, I like this build. I could recommend maybe Demolition Expert or Swift Fish if you want to sink a little more into the offense and pull some out of the survivability. I think that's also a very valid way to build the ship. All right, let's go have a look at a little bit of sample gameplay, and then we'll come back here and do some outro.
Battle starts.
All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to our sample game in Tier 9 Japanese heavy cruiser, Ibuki. As you can tell from the mini-map and looking at things, the overall UI right away, this game is in the new airship escort mode that can occasionally appear in random battles. This game was a bit of a surprise to me. I had sort of forgotten that this was even a thing, and then I zoned into this game and I was like, ugh, what am I gonna do with this ship? I'm gonna pause real briefly at the very start here, just because I wanna kind of talk through the mental gymnastics that I'm taking myself through at the start of the game. Like, okay, what am I gonna do? Cruiser play in airship escort can be a real challenge, right? Because most cruisers cannot be the guy up underneath the ship early. They can't stay there. They're going to have to make turns and maneuvers that are going to take them out of that bubble. And if they don't, they're going to get slapped by some battleship or torpedoes or something. So as a cruiser player in airship escort mode, you have to be thinking about, all right, where can I position myself to have the most impact to disrupt the enemy and be ready to kind of support my team as they move through, let's say, dangerous areas of the map. And as you look at this map here on Shatter, I'm going to unpause it and pull this up. Will it let me? No, it's not going to let me. Okay, that's fine. But as you look at this map here on Shatter, the path our airship is going to take, the most dangerous, is going to be right there through the middle of the board, E5 and F5. So I'm going to play Ibuki at the start here like a bit of a destroyer. I'm going to move up. I realize, okay, what I want to do is I want to move up straight up the 6 line. I want to kind of make a turn, put my port side torpedoes into the water, right into the face of the enemy airship bubble, so that anything underneath that bubble has to deal with my torpedoes. And then I'm going to cut back to the east as the airship kind of moves through that zone, and then I'll maybe hang with it to the south side of the island, and then maybe play a little farther to the south as it kind of moves back north, and then throw shells at the end into anything that's maybe trying to impede its progress. So I've got the guns over the port side. I am moving up here. I'm going to snuggle this island, and I'm going to slow down, and we're going to wait. And we're going to try and time this. One of the things about airship mode is that you can always see the location of the opposing airship. So you know, if that, you can look at the top of the screen here and see, okay, both of them moving 18 knots. That tells me that there is somebody, at least one ship, in that little red circle underneath the opposing airship, helping it move at that speed. So I'm going to chill here for just a minute, and we're going to wait. The opposing Karachulo spotted there underneath the airship. We know it's probably not just him. If you look at ours, there's a battleship and 2 destroyers down there. This Kitakaze off my bow has kind of set up in the same sort of a position that I'm looking for. And those torpedoes in front of me are expressly why I am back here. I know that there's bound to be somebody else up here making the same plan that I am. And so I'm hanging back here until my torpedoes are going to be more relevant, i.e. until that airship starts to move in a little closer. That Buffalo is not only a huge threat to me, but to my destroyers in the area. There's a Yugamo down there. We can catch a glimpse of him now. That's whose torpedoes we just saw going by. And so now I'm going to push up. I'm going to see if I can get a shot on this Yugamo, and I'm going to get ready to put my torps downrange. The Shokaku gets at least 1, if not 2 torpedoes into the Yugamo, so that's always a good place to start. This Buffalo is going to be a huge problem for me if that guy knows his business. His guns are probably looking to his starboard, expecting to shoot at destroyers. I may get these shots for free, and sure enough, that's exactly where we're at. So I'm going to get a bunch of HE on this guy. 9 full pens, 7K. Buffalo is a little soft in that regard. I'm getting good smoke here from this Kitakaze. I hadn't planned on that. But unfortunately, even with the smoke firing penalty, that's not going to quite do it. We're having a bit of a navigational error here, but the Buffalo either doesn't have his hydro up, and he's going to turn right into that torpedo salvo, and that torpedo salvo is going to achieve exactly what I wanted it to achieve, because now the opposing airship, take a look, the Yugamo, the Karachulo bailed, the opposing airship has nobody in the circle to move, and ours has taken the dominant speed now, the dominant position. So now I'm in this channel here, kind of in between what would traditionally be the B and the C caps on a domination game here on Shatter, and I'm going to hang out here for a bit. Part of it is I'm waiting for the airship to catch up. Part of it is I'm waiting to see if this Yugamo is ballsy enough to come back into this... Oh, hello. Hi, submarine. Hi, submarine. How you doing? I should be trying to aim these just a little better, and I sort of don't. Didn't know that guy was there, but we know now. There's the Yugamo. But is he coming in? Not really. Not really. We're going to get some good hits here on the S-189. Wait, okay, as he runs away to the north, we're going to try and lead him again. But the destroyers are making good work of him as well. So now I'm reversing back. I'm just hanging in this gap. I don't, at the time, I'm not really thinking about the airship catching up to me, but I am now in the airship bubble. So now with good, solid cover to my port side here, I'm not worried about getting slapped by a battleship. And so now I can kind of troll at full or 3/4 and move along with the airship, which is now moving 30 knots. All right, so for me now, I'm into the second stage of my game. Airship is through the most dangerous part of the early journey. Now we've got to get it to the finish line. And so now my thinking is, all right, I'm going to keep moving east with this thing. I've got a Florida on my starboard side, a little bit of some ships out in front of me to kind of help cover the goal zone there over on the 10 line. I'm thinking, do I want to vomit torpedoes through this gap? No, let's not do that. Let's turn out a bit and kind of get set into what I would normally think of as a kiting position and deal with this North Carolina and the Alsace that have camped themselves in our goal zone, for lack of a better way to put it. So I'm going to have to start the turn to starboard here. Let the Florida move up and kind of bear the brunt of all of this. At the moment, I've got several kilometers. Okay. So, I thought I had several kilometers of detection range to play with, and ordinarily I would, but now, check it out. The Fletcher that somebody caught a glimpse of very briefly over there on the 9 line, obviously inside my detection bubble, and now I am broadside to both of these battleships that can see me, which I am really unhappy about. Nothing I can do about it for the moment, though. We're going to have to just vomit some torps downrange in the general direction of targets, take a shot at the North Carolina, weather this HE from the Alsace, and then we can start doing Ibuki things. But now something's going to happen that I did not expect. Something happened that he did not intend. I'm going to get a fire on the Alsace, which he mistakenly puts out right away. But this Fletcher, ladies and gentlemen, this hero Fletcher lays me a smokescreen. World of Warships, team play is OP, ladies and gentlemen, because check out what's going to happen now. I'm going to be able to pull the handbrake, dodge the Alsace salvo, wander into the smoke, and now, for 2 full minutes, I get to sit back here and farm big, dumb battleships, especially this Alsace, who's going to take full pins from me for days. I get a torpedo on something in the smoke that has to be a destroyer. Somebody down there we haven't spotted yet. Don't know who, but just glad for it. Our Florida is unfortunately not going to make it. Florida is soft and can't sustain this kind of incoming damage, so that's just how it is. But this Fletcher continues to screen for me out here, and I'm just going to chill in this bubble while I wait for my torpedoes to reload and just absolutely make this Alsace's life a living hell. Now, we have a huge lead. I'm going to pause real briefly. We can talk strategic situation. Our airship has a huge lead. But the enemy team is about to make some big dents in that, right? Because the North Carolina and the Alsace are about to more or less stop our airship. As somebody, I think the Merker has gone back and picked up theirs, and it's now moving through the gap at least 12 knots. There, okay, he grabs it right there, so it's moving up at 18. We catch a brief glimpse of the Chung Mu as he and the Fletchers sense each other, apparently. I'm going to put some shells downrange. He's going to turn out of that salvo. I didn't lead it quite right. I get a little bit of damage. Fletcher's going to clean him up, but unfortunately... Oh, excuse me, I'm going to get that. But unfortunately, it is going to cost my Fletcher his ship. I catch a brief glimpse of their Fletcher. I get one good salvo downrange for about 5K. Always feels good when that can happen. Torpedoes come back up. We get them back into the water. And now I'm trying to, with my smoke expiring, I got about 45 seconds of smoke left. There goes the Fletcher. I'm trying to get ready to kind of, again, to start kiting. But now with the Alsace off the board, North Carolina's moving in. I'm not sure why the Sin Yang is pushing. He should already be turning and kind of firing the torpedoes, but he sort of doesn't. Fletcher now going to come around here and try and do a little smoke farming himself, get right in the airship's path. But, well, I get some shells on him. Another good hit, 5K in a fire. He's got to deal with that. And lucky for me there, okay, the Sin Yang finally dumped his torps and turned out. There we go. Looked like for a minute there he was going to charge this guy. North Carolina trying to slow and stop right underneath our airship and hold that speed down. Smoke expiring basically now. More torps and smoke goes my way as the opposing Fletcher goes down. Some more big hits on the North Carolina. Sen Yang's going to clean him up. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, things start to look much, much better. We're getting pushed from astern now by this Caraccio, the opposing Saipan coming in with a drop. I'm going to put some shells down range of the Merkur because, well, for the moment, that's all I can see. We know the Yugumo is still out there somewhere. Not sure where that guy is. My team is trying to scramble to get somebody up there to keep our airship moving a little faster. I think the Sen Yang and the Littorio are headed that way. Whereas I'm going to come back and deal with this Caraccio. Now, ordinarily, I would not suggest that you take Ibuki into a duel with opposing... Oh, hi, Yugumo! Look who I found, ladies and gentlemen. Well, this is going to turn out to be a mistake, sir. Between the Bismarck secondaries and my main battery, you're not going to survive that experience.
Enemy destroyer found.
As I was saying, ordinarily, I would not recommend taking Ibuki into a close-range duel with an opposing battleship of almost any kind. But remember, my bow armor is still good enough to handle 15-inch shells, I believe. And then, of course, Caracciolo herself is mostly going to be firing the SAP, which is going to do some, I'm gonna get hurt, but I've still got 4 heals. I haven't used any heals yet. So we're going to go ahead and use one right there as I take some big SAP hits. Submarine comes in, cleans him up, and now victory all but assured here in a little over 10 minutes on Shatter. Solid game from Ibuki. And I think if I had to go back and highlight any one thing that I feel like I did better, I did best, it would be target selection. And that's something that I really would encourage you to take into, as you learn to play heavy cruisers, particularly as you learn to play Japanese heavies with these longer reloads, 12, 13, 14 seconds. You've always got to be thinking about, where's my next salvo going, and what am I trying to hit with it? What am I going to do with it? And when a target of opportunity pops up, and you've got the opportunity, like, oh, look, a destroyer, like those Fletcher salvos I got. I got probably 10K out of my HE shells on that guy just by, my guns were loaded, I could see him, that's the shot that I took. And these guns will reward you for that because of their accuracy, as long as you have a pretty good sense of how to lead and where to aim. Merkur seems to have grounded himself back here. I can pick him up on the surface now. Let's see if we can just finish this guy off for some extra damage, maybe an extra kill. Only gets a couple of shells on there. I only need like 1, maybe 2 shells. Hell, my secondaries might get him at this point. But the friendly Shokaku is going to beat me to it. Going to clean that guy up, as we're only 20 seconds from a win here. Our friendly Sen Yang carrying our airship across the line to victory. Have no idea where the opposing Vanguard and Saipan are, but for my purposes, it doesn't matter. The game is over as a solid win. Solid win. Ibuki, I still maintain, is probably one of the more underrated cruisers at Tier 9. Is she, the most amazing ship in the tier? No, probably not. But again, if you understand how to use the Japanese guns, you will absolutely get amazing results out of these ships. It's all about target selection and positioning and prioritizing your survivability, not getting dev struck, because you can absolutely do it in these ships very regularly if you're not careful. 150,000 damage, 1.4 million credits is a really nice result. I can't complain about that. A whole pile of achievements. We got an arsonist on the Alsace. We picked up a Confederate, a dev strike on the Buffalo. We had a Kraken and a high caliber even in this game. 12 fires. Whoo, that's a lot of fires. 2,600 base XP, more than double the guy in second place. Ibuki really, really shines when you have a good idea of kind of what the ship is capable of and what your strengths are. So, not really close to a witherer here, only 30,000 fire damage, but again, when you're shooting these big HE shells at the right targets, you're getting so much full penetration damage, the fire damage almost doesn't have time to rack up, right? I've got 56,000 damage on this Alsace, and it's basically split evenly between HE full pens and fires. Buffalo, of course, taking those 2 torpedoes, he goes down, and then the rest of my really good work against smaller targets, the Fletcher, the Chungmu, and that shell, couple of shells that I got there at the very end on the Yugumo. Not much spotting damage. Again, not what these ships are really good at, but able to survive. And man, that Hero Fletcher smoke made a tremendous amount of difference. I was able to just kind of sit, chill, cover our goal zone, right, for lack of a better way to put it, our end zone, with HE shells and torpedoes. Clean those guys out for our team, and that was a nice team win there. Always nice to see team play when you get the opportunity here in World of Warships. All right, guys, there we go. That's it. That's a wrap on Tier 9 Japanese heavy cruiser Ibuki. I hope you enjoyed all of that. Hope you learned something. Hope you happy grinding, let's say, as you work up the line. Good luck. Wash your hands, and I'll see you on the high seas.